Alan Brocken. We have a bona fide real author here with us today to teach all of you about how to write your very own novel.
Hey, everybody. Great to be here.
So if you guys haven't had a chance to download the worksheet that goes along with this class, I would highly recommend that you go and grab that. I'm going to drop a link in the comments here to the worksheet. The workshop agenda. Tell us a little bit about what we're going to be learning today, Alan.
Yep. You want to go ahead and put the slides up?
Yeah, let me go grab those and put those up for you. Okay.
All right. So we're going to, are we going to jump right in, or are we going to give it a second for people to join?
We're going to give it a second for people to join. And then if you can kind of give us an idea of what we're going to be learning today, as we have people coming in. We have 7 people with us right now. I'd love to hear where you guys are joining us from.
Yeah, it'd be great to know where you're coming in from.
So tell us a little bit about our agenda today, Alan.
Yeah, so today we're going to be talking about 4 major areas of storytelling. We're going to talk about setting, character, conflict and suspense, plot, and then I'm going to show you a little bit about how to put all of those elements together into a story. And I've got to give some special thanks to Brandon Sanderson and David Farland for this course called 318R. If you look up 318R on YouTube, it's Brandon basically took David Farland's class and then he redid it and gives it out for free. But Brandon, if you don't know, is a pretty fantastic, amazing science fiction author, and David was actually his mentor. And so I've met David before and hung out with him a little bit. He's since passed away, but has a really awesome writing course curriculum. And so this has been sort of adapted, kind of toned down for a kid's level. But if you're an adult wanting to get started, this course is a great place to get started, because you know what? It's National Novel Writing Month. And so this is the month you should be writing a novel.
So this course, this video is going to kind of give you guys an introduction to the things that you need to know so that you can dive right in and join Novel Writing Month. So we have Carlin from Canada. Hi, guys.
Hey, how's it going? All right. So I guess we'll give it about 1 more minute. And I guess while we're waiting, I can give you a joke, because I do the joke of the day. So if you do sign up, like when you downloaded the worksheet, there's an option to sign up for the newsletter. And so if you subscribe to my newsletter, every week you're going to get basically the weird holiday you've never heard of for each day of the week. And then a joke of the day, and possibly some fun activities. I try to give 3 or 4 activities a week you can do, because some days you just don't want to you just don't want to homeschool. You want to do something else. And so with my list, it gives you some fun ideas of other things to do, and great dad jokes. I mean, I'm not saying they're great jokes, but they're dad jokes. So like yesterday, I don't know if you knew this or not, but yesterday was National Nachos Day. And so I was going to tell you all a joke about nachos, but it was way too cheesy.
It gets me every time, the dad jokes.
I know, it's horrible. I'm so sorry for the dad jokes, but that's just what I do. So if you like jokes, if you like fun ideas of things to do different every day, go make sure you check that subscribe box when you download the worksheet.
All right, and I'm also going to link over to Alan's very fun class about telling jokes and how to craft jokes and puns. It was a blast to do with you, and it is still a favorite of our community. Looks like we have Micaiah from Pennsylvania, and Alyssa says she likes dad jokes, so you're in good company.
Well, that's great. I'm glad you like dad jokes. I heard a rumor about peanut butter, but I better not spread it. You know why? Because I could end up in a jam. And if the baker found out I told you all, well, I'd be toast. So you see, I could do this all night, but that's not why we're here. We're here to learn about telling stories, not about telling dad jokes. So how about I get started? Is that all right?
Yeah, we have 10 people with us live right now. So I'd love to hear where you guys are from as Alan is jumping into the workshop. So tell me where you're from and if you've ever tried writing a novel.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. I think the main thing to realize when you are when you're the writer, you're really a tour guide, right? Your job as you write things along is to really point out the important things to your reader to help them really understand and get what's going on. So I don't know about you all, but I've been on a tour of an old house or two in my day. And one of the things about an old house is as you look around inside an old house, there are all kinds of things that might be kind of interesting. But it goes to a whole nother level when someone can say, this particular piece of furniture was, owned by the King of England, or, oh, people in the 1800s used this interesting piece of technology you've never seen before. And it's those little details that make it matter and make it interesting. And so, as the writer, one of the things you've got to do is make sure you're really doing a solid job of, giving the tour. So we're going to break that down into really two areas. One of them is world building. The other one is sort of culture, right? Because there are lots of different cultures on the planet Earth, but a lot of the Earth looks the same. If you go to one desert or another desert, they're kind of the same and they've got kind of similar characteristics. But you could put different people groups in them, and you end up with a very different story, so to speak. So let's just talk a little bit about world building. And so in world building, there are hold on just a second. Amelia, I hate to do this, but I got to switch slides.
You need to upload some more slides?
No, I'm just gonna switch to the I uploaded the wrong thing. I'm going to switch to screen share just so we don't have that problem.
Yeah, not a problem.
Sorry about that.
So Micaiah loves to write. He has started many different novels. I can relate to that. I actually wrote my novel that I'm actually publishing right now on my blog during NaNoWRIMO when I was 16. So about 13 years ago, I did NaNoWRIMO and I actually managed to finish the novel. So National Novel Writing Month can be a lot of fun and is a great way to be able to finish a project and be able to have a lot of momentum. If it's a longer project, more than 50,000 words, you can keep on working on it and adding to it. And my first novel ended up becoming a series. So I have several drafts and I have a book that is actually being published on my blog. So I highly encourage you to keep on writing and really take some notes during this workshop because he is given a lot of really great information.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about a number of things in your physical setting in the world. We're going to talk about cosmology, flora and fauna, the geography, weather, science, physics. These are the kind of things that make up your world that really don't matter what the people are or what's going on. The world's kind of there regardless. So, and I know some of these words might not be familiar to you. So let's just talk about cosmology is really, the people in your story, the creatures, the robots, whatever's in your story lives on a planet somewhere, or maybe not on a planet. Maybe they live in outer space. I don't know. I don't know where they live, but at the end of the day, there's some kind of cosmos, some kind of large scale universe around them that may or may not have a lot to do with your story. That is, if you're not writing an epic space thing, you might not go planet to planet. On the other hand, there could be some historical things. There could be different people groups that have different ideas about cosmology, but understanding, sort of the planet or the place that the dimension your characters live in, understanding where that fits in sort of a broader cosmos matters, depending on what your story is. The next thing, flora, is sort of a generic word for plants. Things that are growing out of the ground that maybe don't have intelligence. Although if you're writing alien stuff, maybe these giant, I kind of think they look a little bit like dandelions. Maybe these giant space dandelions are actually intelligent. But the idea is flora are things that kind of grow in the world. So if you're writing something, you got to know what that's like. But then you could also have fauna. You could have creatures, right? These are the creatures that live in your world. And, again, what's really fun about science fiction and fantasy is you can make up creatures. I mean, the reality of it is this really cute blue kitten that, I don't know, is hanging out in the water. It's a wet kitten. This could be in some kind of fantasy story that's got dragons and other stuff like that, or it could be in some space epic. You just don't know. So, fauna and flora kind of matter. They're things that are in the world. Geography is really, what's the space like? Is it mountainous like this, where it's kind of going, from a valley up into mountains, or is it plains and deserts, things like that? All of these things kind of start to build it. And then what's the weather like, right? If you were on this planet, you could end up, being caught up in horrible dust storms that are, life threatening all the time. On the other hand, in another place, the weather could be super mild. So all of these things together kind of lead you towards, well, what's the science like in your world, right? Is it advanced? Is it well understood? Is there a clear way biology works? I think one of my favorite things these days is everybody likes to either throw the word nano or quantum in front of stuff, right? There's a quantum this or a nano that, and that's all science. Those are sort of science terms that get thrown around. But they can matter in your storytelling and how you describe your world. And then finally, in this space, is the physics kind of what you expect, right? Are there giant, floating globes that kind of bob around the world and have their own life? Or is physics kind of normal to what we think? This combination of things kind of makes up a world. So it'd be great to see maybe in the comments, tell me a little bit about what do you think the cosmology of this picture is, right? This is a world. What do you think?
So that would be in the kind of the dimension that it is in?
Yeah. In other words, if we see some stars, right? So from the high level, it's in a place that has a lot of stars, that can see a lot of stars. That matters because one of the unique things about Earth in the universe is that you can see the stars. If we were on Jupiter or Venus, you can't really see off the planet. So this by itself just kind of says it's a place in the universe. Anything you can tell about the weather from this?
What do you guys see in the picture?
Yeah, and these are questions for the audience, and I'm giving it a pause to just see if people answer.
Oh, hi, Alicia. I just was realizing you were able to get on. Hi there.
All right. Well, I think probably the Q&A is probably not going to work the way I wanted it to because I was hoping to get some feedback, but it's kind of hard to do without being more like a live Zoom. So I'm going to kind of move on, but just to say, if we take those ideas of cosmology, this is a planet that's got, a clear view of stars. It's got to be someplace where it can see that. If you think about,
says he's noticing it's very cloudy and stormy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this could be cloudy and stormy. Is there some kind of fauna here? There's some kind of creature.
They're also noticing that it is nighttime. It looks like it is at night.
Yep.
It looks like we had a couple more people join us. If you guys are here for the novel writing workshop, be sure to grab the worksheet as well. I'm just going to go ahead and drop another link to that.
So is there anything we can tell about science or physics from this picture?
They notice that there is a dragon.
Right, the dragon. So if you have a dragon, are there other kinds of creatures you might run into?
Yes, Alyssa says that that they're noticing that it's very stormy.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I think the thing I was going to point out about science and physics is that it looks like there's a hot air balloon. So that means there's got to be something like our physics where, you make the balloon hot and it flies up in the air. Maybe there's some other reason for that, but that's a pretty good guess we could make. And if there are dragons, there could be, I don't know. Usually, if you have a dragon story, there might be knights with horses, or people in armor with horses, things like that. Might be in a story like that. But these are all things that from a world building perspective, there's a lot of stuff you can pull out just from a picture like this. And as a tour guide, you'd want to point those things out, right? Like to describe this picture in words, you'd want to be talking about the storm, and are those clouds, they're not there. There's places where they're kind of wispy, and there's other places where they're really dark. So that could, mean a storm is coming. Same thing with the dragon. That dragon's a little different. I mean, it looks all smoky and stuff. So is it the cause of the bad weather? And if it is, then you've got to describe that for your readers.
And Micaiah also noted that because it has an air balloon, then it must have air similar to Earth.
Right. Or something. Yes, something like that. That's right. That's part of the science and the physics of the world. So I'm going to break this down just a little bit more, because this is actually the cover of my 6th book that just came out on last Saturday, called Demolishing the Stronghold. And so we're going to kind of break this down a little bit, use my stories as a way to talk about the setting. And so what you didn't see in this is that the physical setting in the stories is very much, kind of in the woods, in nature, kind of like what we'd have on Earth, right? Technically, it isn't Earth, but it's very Earth-like in that it's got streams and brooks and plants like you see here. But it's also got, kind of traditional olden time stuff like log cabins and wagons and things like that. And then there are, places in the physical setting, like this church is part of it, some of the architecture that you'd see in this. So with that in mind, we're going to switch then to the next part, which is really kind of the flora and fauna. So in my stories, I've got some interesting animals. There's a kitten. His name's Meow Meow, and he's got some superpowers though. So one of the cool things about writing science fiction and fantasy is you get to make it up. And so Meow Meow's superpower is that he can wake you up, which doesn't seem like that big of a superpower. But if the bad guys are sneaking up on you while you're asleep, it's great to have a little kitten that can wake you up. On the other hand, then we have this frog, and his name's Sparkle Frog, and his power is he can make bumps and bruises go away. And then finally we have Daddy Duck over here. He's a duck that shines powerful light on evil things to make them explode. So these 3 creatures, though, it's really part of the story and the world building that, this, for example, Sparkle Frog is a certain type of frog, and they're known to have these powers. And that's one of the tricky parts about writing this kind of thing is being able to provide something consistent that kind of makes sense, but is also limited. So, one of the Meow Meow's thing is Meow Meow is a tiny kitten. So how does this tiny kitten get everywhere? So I had to kind of make it up so that Meow Meow can teleport, and that kind of solves the problem. So it's a lot of fun when you get to make up your stories, just saying, okay, well, I'm going to break the rules of physics. Meow Meow is the only thing in the story that can teleport, and he does it only on occasion when it really matters to wake people up. So let's talk then a little bit about the cultural setting, right? So the first part of this was really just the world people live in, the world the characters live in. And now we're going to talk about sort of different parts of the world, or how those people put things together. And so there's really a set of things you want to think about. One of them is economy, like just how does money work? Another one that can be important is religion. Then you got to think about maybe government, and then sort of customs. So customs are things that people do when they get together, right? So like my family has a custom that every 4th of July we get together for fireworks and stuff. And we've been doing that this kind of the same way at the same place for the last 10 years. And I'm sure we all have sort of customs. Some of them, like celebrating the 4th of July, is an American thing. It's something that happens in the United States because it's a United States kind of thing. On the other hand, there's certain holidays and things that are global. One of the things that's say more global than 4th of July might be the World Cup. That's something that lots of countries and lots of people have a custom around watching soccer games. So in your worlds and in your stories, you want to think about the customs. The next bit is architecture. So architecture is often driven by customs. They kind of go together. So like if you think about, I mentioned a church earlier in this talk, that architecture goes with the custom of gathering as a group. But in other stories like Star Wars, the Jedi, Jedi Council in their space, that architecture looks very specific and unique. And culturally, you can kind of see these things go together. So if you look at buildings that were designed or built in Southeast Asia, they look very different than buildings designed and built in Norway. Some of that's weather, some of that's custom. And then the last bit you got to think about that's kind of like that is fashion, right? So fashion can also have this flair one way or the other based on where you're at. If part of your world is very icy and snowy, people are going to dress very differently than if it's a very warm, desert climate. But also, if you've got a space epic, you probably might need to dress in a space suit to make that work. And finally, that kind of leads us to jobs, right? Things people do. And so those kind of things can either flow from culture and architecture and things like that, or they can just be kind of necessary things, right? There tend to be in every culture, there tend to be, somebody's got to go take out the trash, right? And so what kind of jobs are there? What kind of jobs might your characters have? Or if you're writing a story about kids, maybe what kind of jobs do their parents have that impact how the kids are acting or impact the kids in the story? So if we and are y'all still with me?
Yes, I'm still here. Okay. I was just mentioning that, a job might be, viper tamers for Micaiah's story.
Yes, viper tamers would be really cool. I want to hear about this. Okay, so let's just talk about that. So if you look at this, can you tell me anything about, say, jobs or economy that might be going on in this story?
Yes, Micaiah agrees that viper tamers would be fun. So what do you guys see in the picture? I love these pictures that we're adding, by the way. It's like, it feels like little sneak peeks into the story.
Well, here's a big question. Based on what's in this picture, would there maybe need to be a viper tamer in this story?
I would say one of the jobs that might be in this story would be someone who can make magical weapons.
You're right. You're actually right about that. Magical weapons are a part of that. I was
big fires, circus.
Yes, the tent, right? And so actually, if you've got vipers in your circus, you might actually need a viper tamer. Okay, so there's a circus. So one of the things about a circus is that's kind of a custom too, right? Like, well, and to be fair, that's maybe not the same as it was. So when I was a kid, one of my earliest memories was going to the circus and having elephants and having all this stuff around. That's actually why I put a circus in my stories, was because it was just so impactful to me when I was like 6 years old. I really wanted to ride the elephants. And so there's this circus in my story, but that's also a way people can make money. There's also jobs wrapped up in that. In the story, there's some people kind of guarding this and managing it and running it. And so they've got jobs. What can you say about the dress or the fashion of this? Is there anything that you can think of that stands out about this fashion?
What do you guys think? Oh, Micaiah says that another job that we could see from this is protectors, people who are protecting them. And right. Heather says that she notices the fashion kind of has an old-timey feel. But it's very pretty.
It is old-timey, but what I've noticed is the last few times I've been in the store, this prairie dress thing is current and modern. It's what all the cool kids are wearing. Yeah, so that tells us a little bit about the fashion. And architecture a little bit here. There's this tent, we get a feel for that. But let's kind of break this down into some more detail then if we go double click on this. From a cultural perspective, this story that we're seeing is actually in this, sort of frontier kind of space. If you notice, there was a lot of woods and things like that. And so we've got kids that have chores in this culture, that like doing chores is a thing. But also their dress and the way they dress is slightly different depending on whether you're a girl or a boy, or you're an older boy or a younger boy. So like young boys in this culture, which is very similar to the United States in the 1800s, actually wore short pants until they got to a certain age, and then they would wear long pants. And that was just a thing. That was just how it was done. But the other thing is, because this has this religious element, there's this idea of bishops and acolytes and things like that. And so there's kind of this more traditional religious robe thing going on from a cultural perspective. But because it's fantasy and you get to do what you want. I really wanted, what I wanted kind of like knights in armor, but on the frontier. And so there's armor in this, and you saw that in the picture. But it was also something that was sort of not true, like full plate armor, right? That wasn't really what I was going for, because that was somewhat impractical. But sort of this mix of sort of plate and other things, and you see that in there. And then you see these kind of weapons, sword, spear, shield, that all kind of represent, the current state of warfare and battle that can go on. So with that, normally when I give this class, I give kind of this first bit, and then people go off and spend some time actually writing the setting. So if you go to your setting worksheet, there's a worksheet there that my thought is you can come back to this. You can pause your recording if you're watching the recording and go and actually do some work in the worksheet. But this would be a great place, especially if you haven't been already kind of writing down some ideas on the setting. This would be a great place to come back to and maybe rewatch this section so you get some ideas about what's going on if you haven't already written them down.
And I'm sharing the link to that worksheet. I just downloaded it, and it's a great worksheet. You guys got to get a hold of it. It really will help with taking notes for this. And it's very thorough in being able to help you to be able to create an outline for your setting and some sneak peeks on some of the other stuff that we're going to get into.
Oh, yeah, Heather, so are there any comments in the thing before I move on?
Yeah, they were mentioning that based on the clothing style, they also thought that there was probably some farmers were a job in the setting as well.
Yes, that's actually how the story starts out. The kids are farmers. All right, so now we're going to transition into character. And so character, every character has this list of things. They all have a past. Like, everybody comes from somewhere. Even if you're a tiny little baby, there was a past of your family that you've got a family history and things like that. So every character has a past. But then they also have relationships. They have ways they're connected to other people. And those relationships often create obligations, things that make it so that they feel they got to go do a thing. And then there's motivations. And what's different between obligations and motivations is obligations are often kind of handed down from parents, or they're part of the culture, or they're outside, right? They're forces from the outside asking you to do a thing, where motivations are more about what you want to do, what you're excited about. And so I kind of look at the difference between, one way to think about obligations is chores, and motivations is screen time, right?
Yes.
Chores in swimming or chores in basketball, one's something you've got to do, and the other is something you like to do. And then the last bit is sensibilities, right? So sensibilities are these kinds of things that you as the character, you kind of think it's right and wrong. And it's a little bit different than obligations, because a lot of times with obligations, it's because you feel someone else will make you in trouble or something. But sensibility is kind of more about what you like or what you think is right and proper, even if no one else ever told you that. So I'll give you an example. In these stories that I was showing, there's kind of this frontier life. And I'm actually going to back up a slide to just show this because I think it's interesting. Notice on the left, the girl has a little bonnet that's kind of hanging off. That bonnet is a sensibility, right? She's got it with her, even though she's not out in the sun, because the bonnet's kind of an important thing to her. She wants to take care of it and keep her from getting sunburned when she goes outside, because this is before sunscreen was really a thing, right? But that's a sensibility. It's like it's proper to have that, whether someone told you that or not. You just kind of think it's the right thing to do. And so with these things, the past, relationship, obligations, motivation, sensibilities, these things really make up each character. And that can get kind of tricky over time, because you only have so much time in your writing to get into this. And so in some cases, you might create a bunch of really interesting content. You might sit down and go, I have this really cool character, and he's got two friends, and those friends, they all made a pact that they're going to go do this thing together. Well, that's all really interesting, but how does it impact your story, right? So you got to be careful. You can go off on this part forever and build all kinds of stuff that doesn't actually help your story move along. So let's talk a little bit about then ways you can move your story along with the character. And so one way to think about it, there's really three levers you can kind of pull with the character to determine how well people perceive them, right? So competence is, are you good at a thing, or are you good at the things that you're doing or that you want to do? Likability is, are you nice almost? It's the kind of thing, or maybe if you're not nice, but you're at least respectful to people. Likability goes a long way to determining whether or not even the people reading the story will like that character. And then the last bit is proactivity, right? So proactivity is about are you good at getting things done? Are you moving things forward yourself? And so characters with a lot of competence that are very likable and proactive, we tend to like them as the reader. On the other hand, people that are missing one or more of these can be really frustrating, right? And so if I think about proactivity, how many, can you think of a character who was really proactive? They always moved ahead and tried to get something done, but wasn't very good at it, wasn't competent. Can you think of a character like that?
I can think of characters who are very proactive, but not one that have a lower level of competence.
Oh, okay. Well, you see it a lot early in stories. You see it as the kid that says, "No, we got to keep going," when you're like, "No, don't go.
Yeah.
You're not ready yet. You're missing something," right? And so, it's tricky for me because a lot of my references go way back to like old school Star Wars. Luke Skywalker
Yes.
is very proactive in The Empire Strikes Back, where he's going to go fight Darth Vader, but he's not competent. He's not able to fight him yet, right? And so you see that in like Star Wars: The Clone Wars a lot. If you've seen that show, Ahsoka likes to do that. She's very proactive. She likes to run after stuff and try to make things happen, but she's not always the best commander and tends to get the clones blown up. So, and that makes me not like her because she's really pushy when she's not really ready to do stuff. So those are kinds of things you can do with your characters to take somebody and on the other hand, you could have somebody that's really, really good, but they're also not proactive. They tend to sit back and not get anything done, which can also be very frustrating for everyone because that person, you want them to be proactive. You want them to move forward because they're really good, but instead they're just going to sit back and let everybody else do the work. So these are ways by
Heather
taking
was
these
mentioning
together. Go ahead.
that someone who has a lot, very proactive but not high competence would be an example that she thinks of is Patrick on SpongeBob.
Yes, Patrick on SpongeBob is perfect. Is Patrick likable? Yes, we like Patrick. He's a sweet guy, but he is so incompetent. It is horrible. And that's also what makes him comedic, right? It's part of his character. So these aren't necessarily a bad thing. Any one of these all the way one way or the other isn't a bad thing, but it's by tweaking these things. And so in that story where you saw with the with the circus tent, there's a character in that book called Uncle, and he is very competent. He is a very competent fighter. He's a very competent woodsman. He can kind of do anything, but he is not very likable. He's also not that proactive. He doesn't want to get into trouble. His job, he feels his goal is to keep the kids out of trouble, and that's part of the conflict of the story. So there's some different ways you can take those ideas I just gave you and build them into a character, right? Those previous things are kind of more about who the character is at kind of their internal level. And this is more about things other people might see. So one way you can do this is you can monologue. You can just have the character describe themselves to others. You just say, treat it like, if you've ever you're ever in a new group of people, like you've gone to summer camp, or you've gone to you're at a new school or something, you have to say hi, describe yourself. You can have the character just sit down and you can say, "Hi, I'm Bob, the new character, and this is where I'm from, and this is what I do." And you can kind of use those bullets on the last slide to say, walk through this. You could basically say, "Hi, I'm Bob, the new character. I came from here. Here's my past. I have a mom and dad and 2 brothers and an uncle. That's my relationships. I have to do these kind of chores every day. here's what I really like to do, and sensibilities could be, here are my pet peeves. You could just walk that through with your voice, acting like you're the character, and just put that on page. And that's a really easy way to get a character to describe themselves. So another way to do it is to just kind of use this formula, right? So you take a role, like something you might see in a story. So we have the wise mentor or the funny sidekick. We take that role, and then we have a funny twist, right? And so let's say you have the funny sidekick, but the last thing you expect the funny sidekick to be is to be an expert in ninjutsu, right? Or something like that. Like they're supposed to be the funny sidekick, they're supposed to do ridiculous things, but all of a sudden they're super competent in something. Or the switch is you've got the hero, right? But they're afraid of something. Something they're not expected, and that's kind of the weakness you could give them. The other thing is not necessarily the expected job, right? And so you could have someone who's the wise mentor, right? You expect them to be this amazing wise mentor, but their job is that they clean up, they clean toilets. That's what they do. You didn't expect that about them. And then finally, the weakness is something that conflicts with that. And so one of my favorite weaknesses that, maybe not be as relevant here, but Indiana Jones' fear of snakes, right? You've got this super heroic guy, but he's afraid of snakes. I've seen in a class that when Brandon Sanderson teaches this class, he talks about the mortician or the undertaker that's afraid of dead bodies. It's like you can't do a job that you're afraid of. So there's that. Actually, here's the funny one. It would be someone who's the viper tamer who's afraid of vipers, right? Like you wouldn't expect that. That would be totally well. How do you get your job done? Mm-hmm. And then the last method we've got is what's known as the dossier method. And so if you look at your worksheet on character, you're going to find this sort of whole list of stuff like height, weight, like all the stuff that you'd see on a driver's license. That's kind of the dossier. And then you've got everything from, do they have extra arms maybe because it's a space thing? So they've got, 18 arms. Or is it something different than that? What's unique about that character? And so you can work through that worksheet to kind of build out a character and do that for multiple characters. So
Micaiah,
before I move on.
Micaiah had a question. They want to know if they can have a main character that is unlikable. How do you pull that off?
So I don't have a good kid example of this, but there's a show called House that's a doctor that nobody likes. This doctor, he is completely unlikable, but he works in the story and people still respect him because he's competent and proactive. And so that's kind of the thing. You can still have people like a character that is completely unlikable from like a friendliness perspective and is rude, but still everyone really likes the character, like enjoys them in the story because of their competence. And so that's actually the thing. So fun fact about that second book I showed you with the circus in it is the uncle character. I actually intended him to go away. Like he was supposed to just be done in the storyline. But despite him being proactive or despite him being super competent, but not likable, people liked him as a character in the story and everyone asked for him back. So I had to write him back into the series.
So yes, you can have a main character that is unlikable as long as they are proactive and competent, or at least one of those.
Yeah, at least one of those. And it can be a mix, right? Like in some cases with the proactivity, sometimes they're proactive, but in a way that no one else likes, right? That's part of what can make them unlikable. Right? Like if you're super proactive about making sure everybody eats their broccoli or something like that, that can make them unlikable. But then you're super healthy if you eat your broccoli. So, there's that. All right. So at this point normally in the class, we'd stop and we'd have you spend 15, 20 minutes working through a character, and we'd talk about that. But for the sake of time, because I've been with our technical difficulty, I'm a little bit behind. I'm going to move on. So the next bit we got to deal with is conflict and suspense. And so conflict they're kind of four major sources of conflict in a story. One of them is the person against themselves. Sometimes you have a sensibility that, you need to be a certain way or do a certain thing, but you can't, right? And you just can't make it happen. You're somebody that thinks you should be a great space pilot in the story, but you're just not good at it. You can't, and it's something that you've got to overcome yourself. The next one is just people against people, and so I mentioned that Uncle character. The kids in the story end up being in conflict with Uncle throughout the story. That's part of what makes him, not as likable as he might be otherwise. And so, that this sort of people versus people thing. In that first picture, I showed this airship and this dragon. Airships versus dragon. That's a conflict of two forces against each other. The next one is sort of against nature, right? Sometimes the problem isn't yourself, isn't other people. It's just the world you live in is hard to deal with, right? If you live on that planet that I showed earlier with the big storm, the big windstorms that can kill you, that conflict in and of itself is an epic conflict. Is when the world can kill you. When I was a kid, one of my favorite authors was Jack London, and he wrote these stories of sort of wilderness survival. And so that wilderness survival is actually a big part of my stories and something that I put in there. So you'll see in my stories some of the conflict, kids have to deal with stuff like sunburn and, almost drowning and dehydration and various things that are caused by the world they're in. And so, that conflict with the world can be a great, great way to build a story. But then finally, you've got sort of person versus society, right? So I mentioned culture and kind of religion earlier. And so there are places where, you as an individual you and your friends are now fighting against some bigger dark force. And that's actually kind of the theme of all of my stories is sort of these kids against this dark force in the world that's coming to take things over. And so that's sort of people versus society, or character versus society, that kind of thing. So the four main conflicts again are person versus themselves, person versus others, person versus the world, like physical world, like nature, and then sort of person versus society. Those are ways you can build conflict in your story. And so, I mentioned earlier kind of the idea of a conflict that's internal, a mortician that's afraid of dead bodies, or an archaeologist who's afraid of snakes, or a strong man who loses his power when he cuts his hair. Those are all things that can create conflicts that are unexpected. And that's what people enjoy, that twist or that thing that you weren't expecting. And so you want to add those in, but it can be tricky to come up with conflict. And so there's a really simple formula that I kind of use called yes, but, no, and. And so what this looks like is, yes, I did something, but it didn't quite work out. Or, no, you can't do that. And here's this other thing on top of it. And so, here's a good example is, yes, I'm here to do this writing class and it's going to be awesome and you're all going to learn a lot. But the internet broke. And so how do we deal with that? There was some suspense there, maybe. Is he going to come back? Where did he go? What happened to the live stream, right? That was a yes, but moment. And no, and I think that's the thing to know about where my stories came from, was this was actually sort of playing this game with my son. So back when it's been like 14 years ago now, I started traveling for work a lot. And my kids would ask me, "What'd you do today, Daddy?" over the phone. And I really didn't have a good story for that because my kids didn't want to hear about RSA 2048-bit encryption or cybersecurity. It wasn't what they were interested in. And it was a tough time, and I couldn't figure it out. And so then one night, my son, his stuffed animal, Sparkle Frog, he told me a story about Sparkle Frog. He said, Sparkle Frog did this and this, and so I said, "Oh, really? And then what happened?" Right? So it was like it was kind of a no way. And then what happened, was kind of how I said it. And then he started to tell me a story. And we just kept playing that way for a while. And then about 2 weeks of that, of me going, "And then what happened?" and him telling me, then he turned around and said, "No, Daddy, you tell me what happened." So that was my no and there, when all of a sudden he started asking me to tell the stories. So anyway, this is a really easy way to do this. And especially if you watch for it, you see all the time in stories where somebody finally is about to get away, but something bad happens. Their spaceship takes off and they think they're getting away from the bad guys, and suddenly there's an asteroid belt, or your sitting there, you're ready to defuse the bomb, and you open the case and all the wires are red, right? Yes, you learn how to do this, but all the wires are red, and now you don't know what to do. And so those kind of things are great ways to add suspense, and it's a great way to keep your story going. And so if you look in your story in the notebook, there's an exercise you can do with your character to kind of walk through some yes, but, no, and some other ways of creating suspense in your story. Next bit of plot is really, this is kind of the classic plot diagram, okay? And so plots tend to start with exposition. This is describing stuff. So I mentioned earlier the tour guide, right? So at the beginning, you've got to give people the setting. You've got to tell people where things are starting from and what you're doing, and kind of start things off, right? And with that exposition, then you start to build to, okay, now here's the real conflict or the conflict arc of the story. And then you have the rising action. And usually your exposition's maybe 25%, maybe a quarter of the story. Not much more than that. It needs to start rising sooner. And if it doesn't, if you end up way over here somewhere with your rising action, if your rising action keeps going like all the way over to here somewhere, or exposition keeps going like people are going to get bored and drop. So you do have to have something happen to move it up. And that point here is called the inciting incident. This little point here that causes this to rise, right? And then in this rising action, this is where a lot of the yes, but, no, ands happen, where you're creating suspense, you're getting people excited about what's going to happen. And then up here at the top, you have the climax. This is the thing that says, hey, we've reached the pinnacle. We've done what we set out to do. And then after that, you've got the falling action, which sort of takes you quickly to a resolution. Now, one of the things about my first book in particular, I'm in a little bit of trouble because people say that I lost my pointer. Say my resolution's too short, because basically it's a series and you're really supposed to go read the next book. But comic books do that all the time, where it just boom, and they're expecting you to pick up the next book. So that's something to be aware of. If you're going to write a series, you've got to make sure each story has enough time to resolve itself to get you to the next story. Another way to think about this is fairly similar, is this thing called the hero's journey. And this is a really common thing. And so if you take anything from like Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, or, well, actually, someone mentioned SpongeBob earlier. There's a SpongeBob movie where he ends up with a big guitar scene in it. SpongeBob movie goes through this too, because it's got sort of, he's hanging out in the ordinary world and someone says, let's go on an adventure. And he says, no, I'm not doing that. And then they meet a mentor. And suddenly, somehow, between meeting the mentor and other things, they cross the threshold. They end up out of their normal life and into something else. Then there's a period of tests, allies, enemies. A lot of things are going on to kind of get into the action. And now you get to this place that's the inner cave, the place where they're going to have the real battle. And then there's some sort of ordeal, some kind of battle, some kind of thing they've got to overcome. And then they get this reward. The reward is, what they got for surviving that. And then to close it out, there's sort of a road back home. How do they get back? How do they do resurrection or atonement? And this is really about, making things right with anyone that, they haven't made things right with. And finally, they've got, this special thing that sets it up. And so if you look at most stories that people really enjoy, there's these elements are in there somewhere, and you can use them to kind of build your story.
One of the stories that really follows that is The Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis. If you guys are familiar with the Narnia series, that one very closely follows the hero's journey.
Yeah, and Star Wars does it in a couple times, actually. You see different characters go through that hero's journey. And you'll see it in, even newer Star Wars, like The Mandalorian. He goes through his own hero's journey in that. The other way to tell a story, though, that's actually more of a short story or something that you can do quick, is this thing called the soap opera sequence. So if you're trying to write a quick story, not a novel, it follows a similar thing, but it's more pointed. And so this is something that you actually see in advertising all the time. This is how like commercials are laid out this. And so there's a setting the stage. What are we talking about? Then suddenly you create some high drama with a little bit of backstory and running into a wall. What's my problem? Then suddenly someone has an epiphany. Here's a aha. And if I have this one thing, that's going to solve my problem. And then there's something special that you didn't even realize. And then finally you should go do something about it, right? And so this type of storytelling, I bring it out here just because sometimes you need to tell a story that's shorter. Like you need to write just a short story for class, or you've got something you're trying to maybe convince somebody to do something. If you can write it in this format, people pick up on it and understand that, oh yeah, okay, yeah, I can see that problem where you created the high drama. I see why that solves the problem. And oh, wow, those benefits look good. Maybe I should do a thing. And so if you look at any advertising, they've got this kind of built into it. So at this point is where you go and get out your plotting thing and kind of work through that with your story. And so, but again, for the sake of time, I'm gonna move on to put it all together. So we've given you a bunch of Legos today. And again, this is a really quick run through. Normally I do this in a class, over a series of sessions, like multiple days of a class where I come in and talk and then they work on it or whatever. But just to say, this is something that you can kind of work on, pause, and come back to the video. And that's what I think is great about this format, is that we're able to put it on live and you guys can see the recording later if you want to come back to it. But to put it all together, we've got a lot of Lego pieces here, right? So I think one of the big things you got to think about is your characters need to earn their conflict resolution, right? Like how the conflict is solved at the end needs to be some kind of struggle, some kind of thing. And that's actually where a lot of people will not like your story if you just win, right? If there's no loss and it's not hard. I use this term plot eagles, or that's another thing, use machina, it's God in the machine, where just suddenly something works, right? The plot eagles is a reference to the Lord of the Rings, where suddenly these eagles just keep showing up and flying people away to safety. And there's not really a reason why the eagles necessarily showed up just at that time, at least not in the way the movies were put together. It's not obvious that anything happened there. And so you want to avoid that. People also use the term plot armor, your armor that can just withstand everything. It's kind of funny in Star Wars, you've got in the episode 4, Han Solo and Luke Skywalker are running around in stormtrooper armor, and they're not hurt at all ever, but they nearly breathe in the direction of a stormtrooper and they kill the stormtrooper. So it's that kind of thing. You don't want you want it to be real. The other thing I'm going to share is Brandon Sanderson's laws of magic, or for that matter, he says of magic, but it could be just high tech or super tech. I mentioned earlier, a lot of people like to use the words quantum or nano all the time to talk about stuff. But it's really about, if you're going to solve the conflict and have it matter, people really need to understand how the magic or the super tech works. So, because if they don't understand how it works, then it's kind of lame that, magic happened and they win. That feels lame. On the other hand, if the magic or the super tech was really hard to put together to make it work, then all of a sudden that feels more useful. And so if you look at, like, you take the Avengers movie and the Endgame and all of that at the end, where they had to come up with their time travel, they really explained all of the time travel really in depth. And, there were big costs to that. Like, the Black Widow had to die to make that all work. And that was part of the system. And so that's the next bit, is the magic system or the high tech. It's the limitations of it that make it really interesting, not necessarily what it can do. It's what it can't do that makes it more interesting. And so, one of the things I mentioned, Sparkle Frog can heal bumps and bruises. So, if you hit your head on a wall or something, and you've got a big bump on your head, the frog can heal that. But in the story and the way I've written it out, the frog can't heal cuts, scrapes, broken bones. It can just kind of deal with bumps and bruises. And so that limitation sets up certain things along the way so that the frog can't just fix everybody. And we ended up with a story. My whole 5th book is partially because the frog can't just fix a character. Like, they've got to go find something that can. And then the last bit is expand on what's already there before you start adding more complex things. It's better to take something that's kind of understood and just be a little bit more clear about it, and to make it cleaner and deeper and well understood than creating a whole new magical, powerful thing. So one of the things I did in the stories with Meow Meow, this kitten that can teleport, I spent a lot of time sort of early in the series where the kitten showing up was at just the right time was kind of convenient, but not terribly. It didn't seem weird that the kitten was where he was. And then finally, near the end of the series, we finally see him actually teleport, like it actually happens, and everybody sees it happen. But that was something that I expanded on, something that was happening throughout that I knew was a power, but no one else. They kind of suspected it, but they didn't know. And so that's what you want to do with this kind of magic or super tech, is to be able to do that. And then the other thing you want to do, and this picture's horrible, but you've got to make sure you keep your promises. So at the beginning of your story, if you make people think you're going to write a dragon fantasy story, and then there's no dragons or fantasy, it becomes a whole sci-fi thriller, people are very disappointed with that. They want to know that if you kind of set up something at the front, that you're going to resolve that thing at the end. And so what I actually did for my first book, because I was trying to learn this skill, is I actually took every paragraph in the book or chunks of paragraph and said, is there a promise in here? And if there are, how do I resolve that? And so I had to go through each thing I said at different parts in the thing. When did I say this, and did this really happen later? To make sure it was resolved by the end. And so that's the end of putting it all together. And so thanks. 5 ways you can support an author. Leave them reviews on Amazon. So if you read my stuff and you like it, please do. I'm on social media at Alan Brocken Author. You can follow me. I have dad jokes of the day. You can share my post. And if you subscribe to the newsletter, like I said earlier, there's a weekly email you're going to get that's got different projects or things you can do at home, joke of the day, and you'll learn about holidays you never knew existed.
Thanks so much for joining us, Alan. Does anyone have any questions for Alan before we hop off? This was a lot of fun, and I think that you provided a lot of really great information for aspiring authors. I think the most important thing is to put that pen to paper, go through and create your world. There is so many people that are going to benefit from reading your stories, and everyone has a story to tell. So I encourage everyone to set aside some time during National Novel Writing Month to write some of their novel.
Yeah, and if you've got interest in any of this, if you've been out to that link, you will have been to my website. I put out cool stuff all the time there. You can check back on the towersoflight.net/homeschool for new stuff that I put out periodically.
Micaiah says thank you, and Heather says thank you for teaching them a lot of things that they didn't know. So thank you very much, Alan.
Awesome. See y'all later.
Bye, everyone.